All right, all. It is 7:03 on the 20th of January for our third meeting of the year 2021 already, because we're almost done with the first month, which is crazy. Good afternoon to everybody. Evening if you're on my coast.
Come on. Sorry.
Geez, Jerry, you serenading us?
Yep.
That's okay, because I forgot to bring the bell up. Hold, please. I do this every week. You'd think I'd get better at it. Dum-dum-dum-dum. Man, George, I'm usually better than this. A little bit.
I discovered these
Oh no, Jerry.
and I figured out the name. They're truly addicting.
Oh God. All right, y'all. Oh, Jerry. Oh, Jerry. Get us started tonight, eventually.
Yeah.
We're officially started. All right, there we go. So tonight we have Mr. George Robertson Burnett, who's going to be presenting to us on Scotch tasting, which is amazing. But I wanted to kick it off and go around the room, see if anybody had anything to share with the group, any happy bucks moments. Jerry?
Yeah. It's a notice. I don't know if I'd call it happy. At least they found it right away. I have a spot that's being removed off the top of my head February 10th because it is cancer. So.
Well, then let's get rid of it by all means.
But they say it'll be cut away and it'll be gone that day. So.
Well, the happy part being that they found it early. I say that's happy. Mr. Nelson.
I've got one. My 20-year-old just started working at Tesla in Fremont yesterday. So today is day 2. And, when a 20-year-old gets a good job, that's a good thing.
That's fantastic. Keith, did you have something? Did you raise your hand earlier?
Yes, I did. And this one's specifically for you. My happy bunch is it was 78 today and sunshiny all day long.
Sorry, I couldn't hear you. You were breaking up. I'm kidding. Don't repeat it.
Yeah, I didn't hear him either.
I didn't hear anything. It's definitely like a 40-mile-an-hour wind and a brisk 27 at my house right now. Thanks.
We got 2 to 3 inches last night.
Yuck.
All that white crap.
It's gorgeous out here in California.
Yeah. This is not my favorite part about everybody being all spread out. This time of year, it's not fair. Anybody else have anything to add? I want to let you guys know that we got an email back from Jabril Crump when Keith reached out about membership, joining the membership committee. She joined our club back earlier last year, and then she was out for a bit. We found out day before yesterday that she and her family have been dealing with some pretty nasty COVID stuff. So she asked for prayers and good thoughts. Just want to put that out there to the group.
Who is that, Amanda?
Jabril Crump. Yeah, she came in, I think maybe just for 1 or 2 meetings before she wasn't able to join us anymore. So, any other news from the group?
She is a paid member, so she is still part of the group, even though she hadn't been in attendance.
But she did respond to Keith. She said she wants to be part of the membership committee, which is fantastic. I'd like to re-engage. So that's good stuff. I don't have anything to pass along from the district or from RI right now that comes to mind. So if there is nothing else from the group, going once, going twice, we will turn it over to Mr. George Robertson Burnett, who will be joining us tonight, has joined us tonight to present to us about Scotch and how to taste it, which all sounds fantastic to me.
Thanks, Amanda.
You're welcome.
Evening, everyone. And I think looking around, I think, Keith, you're probably the closest to me. I come to you from Lakeland, Florida, which is Central Florida near Orlando. And so it's nice to be with you tonight. And
that's the winter home of our Detroit Tigers, sir.
It is indeed.
That one.
Yeah, I know that. In fact, the hotel they stay in isn't too far down the road. So go Bucks. Anyway, sorry. Would it be all right to share screen, Amanda?
Yes, sir, absolutely.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And I'm going to go with that one and there. How's about that? This is, let me tell you, I'm past district governor from this central Florida area, and I'm also the Rotary coordinator. So I do a lot of speaking to groups, as you can imagine, because I cover, as Rotary coordinator, I cover Georgia, Florida, the Caribbean, and 3 countries in South America. So I'm on the road a lot, but just a volunteer like most other people in Rotary, but certainly enjoy it. And somebody asked me to talk to them about Scotch, and I did and put this together. So I am, how would we say, a very, very enthusiastic amateur. So with that said, let me introduce you to Scotch and start off with our own saying, how we say Scotch. Let me see if that, yeah, there it is. And that is Ushkaba. It may not look like Ushkaba, but in Scottish Gaelic tongue, that's what it is. Ushkaba, we didn't call it Scotch, we called it Ushkaba. And that is translated, it actually means the water of life. So there's where we start. Scotch Ushkaba is the water of life. Well, to us Scots anyway, and I hope to convince you by the end that this is the drink that you should be having. You know, it thins the blood, it makes the heart work less hard. So it's a great thing. So here I am, George Robertson Burnett. I have to say that's not how I see myself at all, because that's a kind of boring guy. This is how I see myself. I may be more familiar to you, although probably I'd love to have as much hair as that, I have to say, and I probably look a bit more like that. But however, that is more how I see myself. And let me get into it. So obviously I come from the United Kingdom, as you can probably tell by the accent. As Keith will tell you, there's not many people in Florida who actually come from here, and I'm one of those. I come from the northern part of the United Kingdom. Why they call it the United Kingdom, I'm not very sure, because we are the most disunited 4 nations, which is Scotland, England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. And you may wonder how that border got there between Scotland and England. Let me tell you, in 50 BC, the Romans invaded and worked their way up through England, defeating the English and the Welsh. And then they came on these blue painted people and they decided discretion was the better part of valor, and they stopped there. And that's where the border remains. Interestingly, of course, being Romans, they kept coming across that border and stealing our women and stealing our sheep. So the Clan MacDonald, who were one of the biggest clans at the time, decided that that had to stop. So Donald of the Clan MacDonald said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to build a wall and we're going to make the Romans pay for it. And that's exactly what happened. They actually built Hadrian's Wall, which still is there on the northern part of England. Believe that if you like, it's true. There is a wall there. So there we go. So I'm saying that this country is not actually terribly well united. I'll give you a quick poem, which actually will explain that to you. First, there were the Scots who kept the Sabbath and everything else they could lay their hands on. Then there were the Welsh who prayed on their knees and their neighbours. Thirdly, there were the Irish who never knew what they wanted, but were willing to fight for it anyway. And then there were the English who considered themselves a self-made nation, thus relieving the Almighty of a dreadful responsibility. So that's our poem about the United Kingdom as an introduction, but let me take you, without further ado, to Scotland. And the reason to show you this rather idealized picture of Scotland is that one of the great things about Scotch whisky, or why it is so great, is of course the climate. We're not blessed with great weather, I have to say. It can be very cold and it can be very wet, but it means that we've got very crisp air and we've got very pure water running off the hills, which is obviously something very, very important to the production of Scotch whisky. The other thing that we find with Scotch whisky distilleries is that they're always near water. They're virtually never in any built-up communities. It's almost like a cottage industry, which has grown so big. And so you'll find them in the Highlands of Scotland, actually dispersed throughout the west and north of Scotland is predominantly where they're at. So here's the regions. A Highland region, which includes Speyside. You do get lowland Scotch, but it's not very, not so popular and not so prevalent. There's Islay and Campbelltons. Then there's the island malts, which tend to be more peaty because there's a lot of peat bogs in the islands, and so they're stronger in flavour. So a little bit of the history, and I have to, but there's no knowledge of actually where Scotch started, to be perfectly honest. Not 100% sure where the Scotch came from, but it is unfortunately probably Irish. But I have to admit that probably Irish. My screen is not working. I wonder why that is. Oh, there it is. It decided to work again. Okay, first written record was in 1495 in Lindoris Abbey in Fife. That's the first mention of Scotch whisky, 1495. And lo and behold, disaster befell. It was first taxed in 1644, which actually drove Scotch production underground. And as you're probably aware, the Scots obviously came over to America, and they had underground distilleries in the United States as well. So the first legal distillery was farmer George Smith, who actually took out a license to have a legal distillery and founded the Glenlivet, which you see just over my shoulder here. This is the Glenlivet as it is today, and it's the first legal Scotch, and it's still a fabulous, fabulous Scotch whisky. Phylloxera was a disease that the Scots absolutely love, because in 1860, it attacked the French vineyards, where the then most popular spirit, brandy, came from. And because, of course, they couldn't get brandy, they had to move to some other spirit. And lo and behold, that is why Scotch became so popular. It's because you couldn't get brandy, which was the spirit. And interestingly, one of the offshoots of that was that because they at first didn't like the more earthiness of Scotch whisky, because they preferred that grape, the Scots, being ever resourceful, put their whisky into sherry casks so that it would get a tinge of grape, and it still happens to this day. And as we'll hear later, that's what gives Scotch whisky its colour. So there we have, and then eventually they decided, and would you say only in 2009, they decided what constitutes single malt, single grain, blended malt and blended grain whiskies. So that's a brief history of how it all came about. The most interesting element of that, of course, is the phylloxera. Other than that, we probably would be drinking far more brandy these days. Whiskey manufacture, it's not an overly complex thing. There's the maltings where they germinate the grain, the mashing where they mix it with water, and then the fermentation where they effectively turn it into an almost undrinkable beer. I suppose that would be the best way to describe it. Undrinkable beer. And then after that, it goes into the distillation process, which, and it's double distilled, which actually turns it into Scotch whisky. Except the most important element after that is that it has got to be in a warehouse for at least 3 years. That's the law. It's not Scotch whisky unless it's been in a warehouse for 3 years. So you can't buy whisky less than 3 years old. You'll see a thing on here called the safe. That's an interesting aspect, because my knowledge of Scotch comes from the fact that I was in Her Majesty's Customs and Excise, almost seems to be in a prior life, and therefore I was on the revenue side of whisky production. The safe is the only place that the distiller can actually taste his product. And let me tell you, there's a tap on the end of the safe, and when you turn the tap on, you put a glass under there and come back about 4 hours later, and there's not even a single dram in there yet. It comes out so slowly, but it's enough for him to smell it. It's enough for him to put his finger in and take a taste to see how it is, but that's all he can do. Can't get a drink until after that 3 years. Well, that's the theory, let me put it that way. So you may have heard of the angel share. The angel share is because of evaporation and some of the spirit going into the wood. So over the period of 3 years, as you can see, a lot of the whiskey is actually lost while it sits there, and that is always called the Angel's Share. The longer the whiskey sits in the barrel in the warehouse, the more the angels get. That's the way the Scots figure it anyway. Because there's one thing's for sure: when they open up the barrel, it's not in there. So that's what the Angel's Share is. Also, the coloration. I was saying that we got these sherry casks which came over from Spain, which they store the Scotch in. Scotch, when it's actually made, is the same color as gin. It's there is no color to Scotch, but it's because of the way that we store it that gives it its color and its definition. And of course, different whiskies mature in different ways. So as you're probably aware, spirits, of course, are at 40% by volume of, there's 40% alcohol by volume, and in comparison to a beer, that's 8 times the strength. So therefore, it's a lot more fiery liquid. I was saying that I actually work for Her Majesty's Customs and Excise, and I went to various distilleries. And while I was researching to actually put this together, I found this picture of one of the distilleries that I'd been to, Highland Park Distillery, which is in the Orkney Islands off the north coast of Scotland. Fabulous distillery producing a really great peaty malt, which we'll come to later. But when I actually looked at some of the other pictures of this distillery, I was horrified. I was actually horrified because that is my office that I had up those stairs. And as you can see, they turned it into a coffee shop. I cannot believe, I mean, why would you have a coffee shop at a distillery? I have absolutely no idea. I must write to them and say, why do you have a coffee shop? But I have to say, that is my old office. And I shared it with the other officer who had a penchant for sampling what was being produced in the distillery and used to sleep a lot. And so the traders got to know this, the people that owned the distillery. They would come to the bottom outside that window and they would shout keys. And Robin, which was his name, he would throw the keys out. These keys allowed them to get into the official parts where they had access to the whiskey. So it was totally illegal. You should never have been doing that. And his boss found out. So his boss came up one day and shouted up to the window, keys. And Julie, the keys came out and he thought, right, got him. Went up the stairs into the office and he said, Robin, I just shouted keys and you threw them down to me. He said, well, boss, if I can't give them to you, who can I give them to? So he actually got away with it for his quick quick thinking. And Robin saw his time out. This is also where I found out about the dramming. Because to stop people stealing, they would actually give them a whiskey once in the morning and once in the afternoon. And the youngest employee was sent down to the stream, which feeds the distillery, to take the water out of the stream, to put it into the whiskey so that they kept the purity of the whiskey by putting the proper water in it. That was a happy time, I can assure you. I also went to Glenlossie Distillery, which gives me my story as to, a lot of people ask me, what's your favorite whiskey? I was working at Glenlossie Distillery, and it's got a number of distilleries around about it, Longmorn, Linkwood. They're all in a sort of a bunch there. And I was in the pub at night up in Elgin, which is quite near to this, and saw people from all these different distilleries, but they were all drinking one whiskey. And I thought, well, that's odd. Why wouldn't you be drinking your own? You know, you produce it, you think they drink their own. Lo and behold, when I asked them, they said, well, we can't tell you because we'd have to kill you. But eventually, after a few drinks, they did tell me. And of course, I promised never to tell anybody. So I'll move on. No, I am going to tell you. No, they actually told me that their absolute favorite, because they all drank the same because their favorite was available, and their favorite was Macallan. And it's been my favorite ever since. I've loved Macallan. It's a Speyside. It's very, very mellow. And I went on to open bars and restaurants in England in a hotel, and every one of my establishments would have the Macallan there available. And it's not because of me that it's become so popular, but it is very, very popular. And if you want to try a smooth Scotch, then that's one to go for. So, hey, who wants to unmute themselves and take a stab at saying that? That is a whiskey. Anybody like to take a stab at it? I'll go on.
Genocide.
Close. Very close. It's Auchentoshan. Auchentoshan Distillery, which is absolutely fabulous. Well, we'll try another one. Go on. Anyone like to try that one? Nobody want to try? Okay, it's
Glen
Glen
Garrick.
That's very, very close, Amanda. Very good. It's actually Glengarry, but I'm sure that Glengarrick would know what you were actually asking for. But you know, the Gaelic, which a lot of this comes from, is probably next to Russian, one of the most difficult languages around. Now, everybody should know this one.
And Moray.
It's
Glenmorangie.
Yeah, you got it. Glenmorangie. The emphasis is on the O, and most people have the emphasis on the A, but I can assure you it's on the O. So it's
It's on the more. It's the emphasis is on the more, and that's
yes, Glenmorangie. Yeah. There you go, Glenmorangie. Yeah. So and how about this one?
Krekelaishi.
Oh, that's close.
Regularly.
That's Cregelchi. Yeah, the CH is which is a guttural sound at the back of your throat, which the Germanic nations use and the Scots for some reason. We have that, and the English can't say it. That's why we call it Loch Ness, and they call it Loch Ness, but it's actually Loch Ness. So there we go. Hey, this is a tough one.
Leapfrog.
Lafroig.
That's
Lafroig.
excellent. Well done. It is indeed Lafroig, and Lafroig is kind of famous in the UK because it is absolutely the top favorite of somebody fairly famous. It's Prince Charles's favorite. He loves Lafroig, so I in protest won't drink it. Anything that makes Camilla Parker Bowles look better than Princess Diana, I'm afraid I'm not going to drink it. Also, it obviously alters it. So I'm not drinking it. So this is a really tough one.
Bruges Ladish.
Oh, that is
Bruce
excellent. It's actually Brew Laddie, but even to get the Laddie is fabulous. Yeah, it's Brew Laddie, which is another fine whiskey from the west side. Now, this is probably the biggest, most produced malt whiskey. I have it here.
Glenfiddich.
I think it's Glenfiddich. I've been following. I'm learning Gaelic as we go. Is it Glenfiddich?
Who's getting the Gaelic books out there? One of the things that Gaelic does is that it's inconsistent, and that one is Glenfiddich. So it's not fair. You're absolutely right. And you know what? Whoever invented Gaelic, they didn't have the four-way test. There's no fairness to all in this, I can assure you. It just doesn't exist.
Oh my gosh. Buna Hapain.
Yeah, you know what? You're really very close. When I did this last time, I mean, it was outlandish, but anyway, that's Bunnahabhain. Bunnahabhain. Yeah, the BH becomes a V for some reason.
I've got a bottle of that in the cabinet now.
So we'll not be taking up Gaelic. You know, one of the often asked questions is what sort of glass, because you see these glasses, these ones, which are supposed to concentrate the smell, and that's the reason. I don't like them because when they were handing out noses, I thought they said roses, and I asked for a big red one. So the problem is that I can't get my nose in it. You know? So I've got a tendency to spill. So I have to say that I prefer this. But you know what? I mean, this is not a tutorial on what you should do. This is just an element of preference. If you have a preference for these, they are rather nice, and they do concentrate. But I just like to get my nose right into a Scotch. So I prefer the older traditional glass. So to ice or not to ice, how many of you have been to the United Kingdom? You'll know if you've been to the United Kingdom, the ice is a very rare commodity. The trouble is that we lost the recipe. We don't know how to make the stuff. You know, when you go into a bar and ask for ice in your drink, the most likely thing they'll say is, do you want 1 lump or 2? Seriously, that's what they will say. Do you want 1 lump or 2? because it's rationed. So anyway, the question is, do you put ice in your whiskey? And it's a preference, but one thing I would say that if you do put ice into your whiskey, there's a great way to do it without overly diluting the drink. So it chills it. For us folks in Florida and California, of course, we love it chilled. So this is the way to do it. You have one large ball of ice. That's the way that you impart. You don't dilute it too much, but you do cool it down. That's a great way to actually drink Scotch, and I do like it that way. So here we go on to how do we actually do the tasting? So you pour the desired
Hey,
amount.
George?
Sorry, did somebody
Hey,
want
George?
that? Yes.
Yeah, I got a question.
Yeah, sure.
Do the Scots use like the marble rocks or the, just to
Yep.
keep it cold or rather nice?
Whiskey stones are a lot more popular now, and I do have those, and I do actually like that, particularly if I'm trying a whiskey for the first time, because I don't want that water in it. I want to see what it's about. So the whiskey stones are a lot more popular now, and they're a great idea for those that don't like the dilution. I'll hold my hand up. I actually like a little bit of water in my whiskey. I think it releases some of the wonderful aromas and releases some of the taste. So that's a particular for me. But as I say, it's whatever way that you actually. Yeah. Just as an aside, I will tell you that.
How do you ask for a cold drink in Scotland?
When you want a cold drink.
Yeah, if you want it cold, you like it extra cold.
Well, having said that, we don't really have good weather. We often don't want cold drinks. Our beer is sold warm. Our whiskey is sold straight from at room temperature, as all of our drinks are. Very unusual to ask. I know some bars in Glasgow. If you went in and asked for ice in your whiskey, they'd say, "Sorry, we don't do cocktails." They just it's just not something that they consider.
It's not done.
No, it's just not the done thing. However, because of lager beers are more popular now, they come pre-cooled, so you can get cold. You can get cold lager beers now, but cold is not something that they look for. So
thank you. Sorry.
Hey, you interrupted any time. No, please ask at any time. Absolutely no problem. So swirling the dram releases, the flavors, releases the smells, and then you stick your nose in it, and oh my goodness me, it really is great. Particularly if you've got trouble with your sinuses. This is really, oh, that's wonderful, absolutely fabulous. So. And the recommendation is that you actually do that 3 times, and noting the legs on the side of the glass. This is not a good glass because it's crystal and therefore you can't see them. But if it holds on to the side, that's because of its age and its maturity. So there you go. So then you take a sip and you chew the whiskey around so you get it all over your palate. And excuse me, I've just got to. I excited my taste buds by sticking my nose in the glass. God, that's just wonderful. And then you draw a breath of air over your tongue, and that gives you all that wonderful aroma and flavor that's residual. So that's how you would taste a good Scotch. And let me tell you, they are all different. There is absolutely. My father always used to say, there's no bad whiskey, but there's just some that are better than others. The other thing that I want to you've gone about 2 fingers of whiskey here. We do have 2 fingers of whiskey in Scotland, but those are the 2 fingers. You got to have a decent dram. These short measures that you have. No. That's 2 fingers of whiskey. That's the way it should be. Okay, so let's have a look at. Now I wanted to bring this one to you. It's actually called the grouse. We call it grouse, and this is a particularly great. But this is a blended whiskey rather than a malt whiskey. That means that it comes from various different distilleries. and it can be a mixtures of grain and barley. So it's a blended whiskey, but this is a particular favourite on the east coast of Scotland. On the west coast of Scotland, they don't drink so much of this. They prefer Bell's, which is a harder flavour. Grouse is very, very smooth. So this is, if I want to have a longer drink, you know, a cocktail or something with Scotch, then this is what I would use, because I don't want to use malt whiskey in it. And when you actually have some of this, it's really is, it's a great flavour. So it's golden in appearance, crisp and light. It's got an overview of barley biscuits and hints of toffee apple and dried flour. Okay, I'm not noticing the toffee apple. Maybe it's a bit cold in Lakeland today. The palate, it's biscuits and creamy malt flavour, a hint of spice, and it's very, very slightly smoky, very slightly. And it's got a slight, sweet, malty finish. So it's a very malty, biscuity blend. The reason it's called a low flyer is because that's what a grouse does. It flies very low over the countryside. And let me tell you, if you go into a bar or a hotel in the east coast of Scotland and ask for a low flyer, he won't even ask a question. He'll just go straight for the grouse and pour you a grouse, because that's what we call it. It's called a low flyer. Excellent blended whiskey and freely available here in the United States. So so that's a good one for that. I wanted to move on to Macallan because it is actually, without doubt, in my opinion, one of the smoothest whiskies, and one that's a particularly favourite of mine, and it's become very, very popular. This one is 12 years old. The older it gets, obviously, the smoother it gets is the theory. That doesn't go on forever, I have to say. And one question that's often asked is, does it get any better in the bottle? And the answer is no. It doesn't change in the bottle. The 12 years relates to 12 years that it sat in a barrel, not anything else. So it's quite simple. When it went in this bottle, it was 12 years old. So now it's 12 years and 3 weeks, and it won't see another month. You know, it's as simple as that.
Is it 12 years from the time it went in the cask, or is it 12 years from the time it went into distillery?
No, 12 years from the time it went in the cask. So as soon the cask gets coded, and so the years only start once it's in the cask and it goes into the warehouse. And then on its third birthday, it may go to be blended like the grouse, or they are allowed to take samplings, very small samplings. If they decide that this is maturing particularly well, they'll put it away for another. 12 years is very popular. After that, they get fairly expensive. I mean, obviously there's an expense to keeping them, and therefore they are more expensive at that stage. But once it goes in that bottle, you can keep it for 50 years, and it's still a 12-year-old Scotch. So it stays like that. So when you're looking at Macallan, it's very deep amber, and it has very strong legs because it's 12 years old. It holds on to the glass. It's not syrupy, but it's certainly got a lot more cling, and it's very oaky, because Macallan still import their sherry casks directly from Spain at great expense, and therefore, I mean, they're not the only ones that do it, and I'm not for any moment suggesting that if you taste it, you might not like the mellow flavour. They're stronger ones, obviously. The stronger ones are the Islay malts. That's if you really like a strong, peaty, grab your throat kind of Scotch, then go for Islay malts, like Lefroy. That's a very, very heavy one. But these are very smooth. East Coasters like their whiskies a lot smoother, and this one's got spiced plums, dark sherry, and it's got a plummy sweetness, and that's very much from the sherry cask. A lot of that is coming from the sherry cask. As an aside, I will tell you, because there's so much Scotch whiskey drank in Japan, they tried to copy it, and guess what? They couldn't. But it wasn't it wasn't that they couldn't get the process right. Everything they got right. What they couldn't get right was the imperfections. The imperfections that are in the air, are in the water. They couldn't emulate that, so they gave up eventually. So the palate is sweet and full sherry with plums, sugary, cinnamon, and nutmeg, and it's a wonderful after dinner drink. It's got a very mild burn with lingering sweetness, and it's reminiscent of iced cinnamon rolls. So there we go. It's a giant for those preferring the mellow malts. And my last one is Highland Park, because I love Highland Park because obviously having worked there, and Highland Park is a stronger whiskey. It's a peaty malt, and therefore it's got strong peat elements. Now this, the Macallan is very easy to come by in the United States. This one has gone, in the last 2 months, gone out of production in the United States. You can only get the 12 or the 18. You can't get the 15 anymore. I think it's because they're drinking so much of it in Scotland, they've run out. So sorry about that, but you can't get it here anymore. It's a very, very, as you can possibly see how dark it is in comparison. It's traditional maltings. It's smoked over peat, which gives it a different flavor. Orange and lemon peel, sea breeze, because it is very, very near to the coast of the Story. And it's like a vanilla custard to the nose. Smoky, peaty, heavily toasted malt, because they do a lot of smoking at that Story. I don't mean the men smoke a lot. I mean, they actually smoke the grain for a prolonged period. So it's a heavily toasted malt with hints of sultanas and red currant. It's got a lingering smokiness, if you like that, and it's a delicate peaty smoke. And just as an aside, Highland Park is the most northerly Scotch whisky distillery in the country. So they really have some terrible weather up there. But hence they've got good Scotch to go home to, so there's no problem there. Just wanted to mention cocktails. For those that like cocktails, my particular favourite is a rusty nail, which is Scotch whisky with Drambuie. Drambuie is what we call the spirit of 45, and the 45 that they're referring to is 1745, when Bonnie Prince Charlie tried to take over what is now the United Kingdom. And this is called the spirit of 45. It was around at the time, and they thought that it was medicinal. Well, maybe it is, but either way, it's very, very, it's sweet. And when you mix it with whiskey, it makes a rusty nail, and that's absolutely fabulous. So there we have some of the cocktails, and I will answer any questions you may have. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. You know, as I say, I'm just a very, very keen amateur, and blimey, my throat's dry. I must have talked a lot.
If only there was something you could drink to wet it again.
I know. It just so happens, Amanda, I've just found something.
I have to tell you guys, I texted my husband and I said, could you bring me a drink? And he brought me a rum and a glass of, what is this? It's French champagne and a charcuterie board. So I just wanted to rub that in.
Oh, that is fabulous. Does he
And
take
that's what you
orders?
get. And
Does he
that's what you get
deliver?
when you marry an Irishman.
Hey, George, Johnny Walker has several kinds of, or levels of Scotch.
indeed.
What's the difference between red and blue? What's the process?
Okay, so red is the very basic Johnny Walker, whereas blue is the deluxe. Johnny Walker was made the most popular whiskey in France during the war, not by British soldiers, but by American soldiers. Americans loved Johnny Walker with a vengeance. And therefore, the French got very enthusiastic to get Johnny Walker to feed to the American troops. And they have consistently done that. Interestingly, when we joined the Common Market, as it was called, the European Community, because we had to equalize the price, Johnny Walker could not be bought in Scotland because they were selling it to the French for a higher price and didn't want to sell it, didn't want to have to pay the high price themselves. So instead of actually doing that, they actually stopped selling Johnny Walker and they rebranded it as Jimmy Bar. And you could buy Jimmy Bar, which was Johnny Walker in Scotland, and you could buy Johnny Walker. So the red is the how would you say, the cooking Scotch. You know, it's the one that you would use for cocktail, or, you know, it's a very, very pleasant blended whiskey. Now the blue is still blended, but it's blended from what's considered finer malt whiskies. And I have to say, David, it's excellent. The Johnny Walker Blue is a
We've had it,
fabulous
yeah.
drink.
Can't afford it, but we've had it.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you've tried it because it's well worth the trying. Yeah.
Right.
Oh, that's good.
Well, what were you drinking, George? I forgot.
That was that Highland Park.
That's right. Oh, my husband just gave you the thumbs up
Yeah.
over there in the corner. I was laughing when you said that we should all be glad about phylloxera. Phylloxera is also the reason that the French have no claim on the vines that they have because they all came from California.
There you go.
Virginia, actually.
Virginia. Hey, I didn't know that. I'm adding that.
Yeah, they brought the rootstock from Virginia. I happen to be married to a sommelier.
Fabulous. Fabulous.
Keeping him. I told John Cram, I asked him for a drink and he brought me champagne and a charcuterie board and he said, you better keep that one. It's been 20 years. I can't return him anymore anyway. So whiskey with no E is Scott.
It's
from
Scotch. Yeah.
And whiskey with an E is from Ireland. Is that true?
Ireland and the United States.
Okay.
Yeah, we could never spell. We have no
I feel
idea.
like you went the most efficient way. I'm fine with it.
Yeah, well,
I'm Welsh. We don't know anything about efficiency in spelling at all.
I'm Welsh as well.
we're economic with everything. You know, I mean, Scots are known for having very deep pockets and very short arms.
Well, they
You
even
know.
got rid of 8 of the rugby players. They were like, we only need 7. It's fine.
So I never drank
George?
one Scotch, but I think a real testing between everything would be the best to find out what you're really talking, that I can mix, the tasting to the pictures I just saw and the, explaining you did. So I never ever had any Scotch at all.
Never have had never had a Scotch. Well, my recommendation would be to start with something like Famous Grouse, and say smell it, put a little in. Don't it's it's not a chugging thing. It's let it sort of permeate and get that warmth, and then find out if you prefer it in that state or whether to add water.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, if you want to commit the cardinal sin, put Coca-Cola in it.
No,
No, don't do that. Don't do that. Do that with whiskey, but don't do that.
Never do that.
No.
I saw somebody do that. I almost cried.
For sure.
George, there's most of the brands have several different years. Is there kind of a sweet spot where you get the, a superior Scotch without paying quite as high a price as you do for some of like the 21 year and 18 and whatnot?
I would say that for me, the balance between being economic and flavor, I think 10, 12 years hits that spot wonderfully for me. But having said that, the grouse is 3 years old, and I'm just as likely on a more regular basis. I tend to keep the 12 years for something special like a non-birthday, or I have 364 days of those a year, but I'm happy with a grouse at the end of a working day because it's a great price. It's a great whiskey. And I just remind you, my father said there is no bad whiskey. It's just for those extra special occasions, and if you've got friends around, I think a 12-year-old is great. And I think that's once you get to 18 years old, the price differential, and quite surprisingly, I've had Macallan 18 years old and thought it was less, it was less for my palate. To never say that it's not as good because it's your palate, but it wasn't as good for my palate. I prefer the 12. I have a 15 here, but I reach for the 12. So I would say that's the sweet spot for me and for an awful lot of people. And I think the whiskey industry has recognized that. You see a lot of 12-year-old, which is, and there are some wonderful examples about.
Is Highland Park generally available?
Highland Park is generally available. Yes, you get it at, I mean, I don't know if ABC would, I think probably it is, I see it fairly regularly. I have a 12-year-old, yeah, this is what you would look for. It's a kind of fine box. That's a 12-year-old Highland Park, and it's got this Celtic stuff on the front of it. And of course, the Orkney Islands and the Shetland Islands, we got as a dowry from the Norse, and so they've got something about Vikings on the front here. This part of Scotland, but they've got a lot of Viking heritage. So you'll see that. That's the box to look out for the 12-year-old, and it's kind of fine bottle on the inside.
The invisible husband over here would like to know how much of a 12-year-old Scotch has to be, how much of a 12-year-old Scotch has to be 12 years old to be called 12-year-old Scotch?
All of it. You can't mix, you can't put some different years in there. It has to all be that age. In fact, it's very, very strictly controlled. But as I was saying as part of the presentation, only in 2009 did they put a lot of these rules in. I mean, there was almost a cavalier attitude to the whole industry because it's, you know, it's not that it's not mainstream, but it all goes on in the Highlands, you know, in quieter areas. So a little bit cavalier, but in 2009 they wrote down the rules. There always had been the 3-year rule, but now there's a lot more enforcement as to because to protect the name of Scotch whisky, you know, it's.
So George, you'd say it's less regulated than the beers, for example. I mean, Uta, how many years has Germany regulated beer?
Well, beer regulation goes back a long way. With Scotch, they tried to regulate it, but that made it effectively, it went on illegally. Whereas beer didn't go through that phase. It stayed regulated. But the Scotch whisky industry became unregulated. And if I was to put my hand on my heart, I could not tell you that there are not illegal distilleries in Scotland. I mean, I couldn't say that because, I mean, the process is, you know, it's not rocket science, you know, it's distillation, you know, so.
George,
yes,
I got a question for you.
Yes, sir.
Do you have like a beginner's guide, 1-pager of Scotch? I have no knowledge of anything about Scotch.
I could either send you this PowerPoint or
yes.
Would that help?
Yeah, that will help get me started.
Yeah. If you put your email address in the chat box and I'll get something to you.
Okay.
Amanda, is this PowerPoint going to be on the website with the notes?
If Mr. Robertson Burnett would like to send it, I would.
No problem. It will be done.
Thank you.
The beer, by the way, only to answer Scott's question, 300 years was the birthday from the Reinheitsgebot. It calls that you only can use certain ingredients to make beer, and it's 300 years old.
Wow.
And it's still brewed at this Reinheitsgebot, still.
Yeah, great beers, absolutely fabulous beers.
Thank you.
And you know, in Scotland, there's a tradition of having a half a pint of beer and a dram of Scotch, and they call it having a half and a half. And you drink the Scotch, and then you wring the glass out into the beer so that you put a little bit of the whiskey into the beer, and then you drink the beer. So
you know, we have something similar in North Germany. You
Oh,
have
you
a
do?
beer glass. You have a beer glass like a normal glass like that, and you hold it like this, and then you have a schnapps, a little glass with the schnapps inside. So when you make this, it's also mixing with the beer and the schnapps. It's the same.
Excellent.
George, do you know much about the transitions then? I mean, I'm assuming that the southern U.S. and the bourbon and whiskey traditions come from the Scotch and the Irish. Do you know much about that?
Yeah, a lot of the traditions. When the Scots actually, there was a potato famine, which actually meant, I mean, the Scots-Irish are actually Scottish people that moved to Ireland. The potato famine forced them to leave Ireland. So their original element was they were Scots settled in Ireland, where there was a great affinity because they're both Celtic nations, of course. But when the potato famine came, they came over to the United States. They didn't stay in the northern reaches where a lot of other people did. They actually came down further south, and distilling whiskey was a great tradition, of course. And so they started. There's a lot of Scots in that area, and there's a special Scottish caucus in Washington D.C. I don't know if you knew that. You know, because of the effect that the Scots had, because it's a small nation, as I'm sure you're aware. England is 10 times bigger than Scotland population-wise. Mind you, if we were flat, we would have more land. It's just that we're mountainous, you know, they're flat and boring. Anyway, there's no bias here, no bias at all. But you know, for a small nation, we were spread pretty well, and a lot of the expertise in whiskey originally came. I'm not claiming that Jim Beam is ours or anything like that, but a lot of that expertise came from the Scots-Irish settlers, and I think you can tell that in the bourbons and things like that today. You know, there's some very fine examples. It's not my natural tipple because, of course, you're not brought up on it, you know, and, you know, my father would turn in his grave, you know, I mean, my father always said, never trust a camel or anything else that can go a week without a drink.
George, I'm a rabid tequila fan.
Okay.
And I drink Cuervo 1800 Añejo. I don't like a lot of ice and water in it, but I take and I put it in the freezer. Wow. And just add one ice cube, and it keeps it cold while I'm drinking it. I drink it out of a highball glass.
Really?
Yeah, I love it that way. But I'm just wondering, would keeping your Scotch cold in a freezer, would that damage it at all?
I've never tried it, and I'm not going to risk it. I'm not going to risk it because, but I have got an interesting thing to tell you about tequila. We on occasions have a dessert made with tequila, and it's tequila poured over vanilla ice cream, and it's a great dessert.
Wow.
It's really very nice.
I want to ruin my tequila.
It doesn't. It just, I mean, effectively, it's tequila flavored vanilla ice cream. I mean, it's a no-brainer. It's easy. It's the most easy dessert.
And I like cream de menthe over it.
Yeah.
George,
You can
I've got
try
a
anything. You know.
Got a question for you that might be out of your area of expertise, but very much of interest to the group here. What do you know about motorcycling opportunities?
Zero.
Winding mountain roads though, right?
I'm so sorry. The only thing I know about motorbikes is when my dad was making his way to Dunkirk at great speed, he did so on a motorbike. So and it's now sitting at the bottom of Dunkirk Harbour because that's where he dumped it.
I have to think though, I think we could probably put together a pretty amazing distillery hopping ride.
I will tell you that we did the whiskey trail on the motorcycles, and you can put a fifth in your saddlebags till you get to the hotel, and then you can do all your tasting when you get there if you're worried about getting too drunk. We had a great time, and I mean, you maybe have one shot when you stop, but you just don't overindulge in the taste testing. But it was great.
And you know, they're so pleased to see you. They really are.
Mhm.
It's yeah, they really make it special for you visiting any distillery. And of course, they always give you a dram, and they are very mindful of the drinking. I see somebody's
Yeah,
getting.
and they were very polite about understanding that you didn't want to taste everything, and
Yeah.
that you'd been tasting at other, distilleries along the route. So they were really good about giving you a fifth and telling you about it all. But we took 1 or 2 tours because, frankly, you've seen one tour. You don't need to go on every tour because you've seen them all. But everything was unique. We got patches and stickers from every place, and
Yeah.
It was fascinating. We had a great time.
Fabulous. I see somebody's getting Lagavulin 16. That would be 16 years old. That is amazing, by the way. That is amazing.
I have good friends.
Yeah, you do. Hey, Scott, way to go. That's a great whiskey.
I personally found that topping penicillin with Lagavulin 16 is perfection.
Sorry, I didn't catch that.
Topping the cocktail penicillin with Lagavulin 16 because it asks for like a smoky float of scotch on the top.
Yeah.
Provides a really nice drink.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
Like a brain for this stuff.
So what settled you on Lagavulin 16? Just the taste, or?
I think honestly, like the fact that it's sort of like very like it's like well known enough that people know that it's like a really nice it's a really nice scotch, and like even after like a very small taste myself, like I can already tell like
Yeah, it's very, very special. Very special. Yeah. So you heard right. It's considered a connoisseur's whiskey. Well done.
I've got a brother in San Francisco with good taste. He keeps those well stocked every year.
George, we have a number of people who have hopped off and gave you their thanks and told you it was a fantastic presentation. I want to echo that. I definitely agree. I am not kicking off anybody by any stretch of the imagination. I just wanted to make sure that everybody gets a chance to ask questions if you have any additional questions before we wrap up.
And I'll make sure that you get the PowerPoint.
Thank you.
So much.
George, it's a fascinating presentation. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Oh, Keith, I appreciate it.
I think when we all get together, when we all get together in Houston for the national convention, to stop by and we can do a tasting together.
Looking forward to Houston. Yeah.
I don't know where Uta is to you, but she's over here to me. Uta will be our president at that point, and David, who's over there, David Yenneral, will be our next president after her. So I'm sure they are not in those same positions for you guys, but
and I'm sitting in Houston. So if you want to contact or whatever, you can also contact me then. So no problem with that. With the convention in Houston.
Yep, Uta is our resident Houstonian.
Yeah.
You had quite a group. You had quite a group on tonight. I'm trying to. I'm not going to get everybody, but California, Florida, Virginia, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Texas, Georgia, Emilio. I always forget where you are.
Georgia? South Carolina.
Carolina. Yeah, you had everybody from everywhere tonight. So our group should have started with this, but we're all across the United States and Canada. We have a member in Mexico City and one in Guatemala City. So We all try to stay roughly within the same time zone. Makes it a little bit.
Yeah, makes sense. Hey, it's
So-
been a great group. I really appreciate it.
We are very happy and thank you very much for coming. So I'm gonna pick on somebody. I think I'm gonna pick on Mr. Dougherty tonight to lead us in the 4-way test to end our meeting.
Of all the things we think, say, or do, first,
Is
is
it
it true? Second, third, of all concerned.
All concerned.
Third, would build
Will
good and better friendships.
Friendship?
Fourth,
Will
Will
it be
it be
beneficial
To all concerned.
All concerned.
5.
fifth.
Will it be fun?
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thank you,
George. I
Doug.
appreciate
Thank
you
you.
guys.
Night,
Okay,
everybody.
Mickey, can you hang out for just a second? Have a great night, guys.
Bye, guys.